Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to be here today. As you heard, my name is Verena Metze-Mangold. I'm president of the German Commission for UNESCO. I have been a lifelong media professional and always very interested in the subject of technologies and media and cultural development. And if you think about the subject in an international direction, so the reason is here why we are debating the development. The reason is that we are in the middle of a revolution. Everybody talks about disruptive industries which come up. And especially in the cultural industries, this is something very important because it's more or less a societal and political question, how we can survive in a way this international challenge of gigantic companies in this digital era with our European ideas and models. And even we have to say with our international ideas and even treaties, like the mentioned Treaty of 2005 on the protection and promotion of cultural diversity. This is the first international heritage treaty which is not only coping with the question of heritage, but as well with the shaping of our societies for the future. And therefore it's a very important convention. But nevertheless, we have to face that we, in between the 10 years from 2005 on, experienced a total different world. And what are the pros and cons? This do we want to debate here. Protect me from what I want. This is the title for our panel. And the sub-question is, in which ways do big data analysis and social media influence cultural production and creation? To answer these questions, we have four most interesting speakers on this panel, who I have the pleasure to introduce to you. And I will begin with, on my far right, Emmanuel Durand. He is Senior Vice President, Marketing, Data and Innovation at Warner Brothers, as you know, the world leader in filmed entertainment for France. As Vice President, he covered cinema, video and games, digital games as well as video games. And today he is in charge of leading the digital turnaround of his company. As well, he lectures at Sciences Po in Paris, and he is author of the book La menace fantôme, les industries culturelles face au numérique. Welcome with me, Emmanuel Durand.
Thank you.
To my right is Ramzi Risk. I pronounce it rightly? Fine. We both speak German. Co-founder and CTO of IM, the biggest independent platform for photography and as well a social media for a creative community called the Instagram of Profis. And this is a very new company since 2010 developing. He has been born in Lebanon, studied in Hamburg, and lives in Berlin in Germany. And I think he is one of the creative undertaker and creative producer of today. To my left, Sol Ingram, co-founder and CEO from Tondo, the art world's social media situated in London, Great Britain. Sol is a perfect example for crossing the river from analog to digital world. Prior to co-founding Tondo, Sol was managing director of contemporary art of Sotheby's, and his platform has impacts on the arts markets, and he will tell us why. Welcome, Sol Ingram, please. And last but not least, Nicolas Petit, COO, Senior Director Marketing and Operations Microsoft France, and a leadership member of Microsoft company. He grew market share and profitability across PC, smartphone, online, and search business, and won 5 industry awards, and will us perhaps explain what is Europa Nova, where he is advisory board member, and welcome as well to Nicolas Petit. Protect me from what I want. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to give you a short introduction. Anniversaries are a time for reflection and planning. The 10th anniversary of UNESCO's 2005 convention, the protection and promotion of diversity of cultural expressions, provides its parties, statal parties, and non-governmental stakeholders with a significant opportunity to recall its origins, critically review the achievements, and on this basis form an ambition for the implementation of the convention for the next 10 or even 20 or even 30 years. To do so, on this panel, we will talk in 3 rounds about, first, what the panelists do today and how they do it, using these stunning technologies responsible for what we call disruptive industries. Second round, I want the panelists to give us a forecast, how they would describe the main features of the future to come, with big data being the oil of the digital era, algorithm, meanwhile programming algorithms, and reigning more and more our lives without us. Or the possibilities of social media, which seemingly are changing our idea of the public sphere. And last but not least, in the third round, as several parts of the convention are pleading in favor of a better consideration of digital issues in the implementation of the convention, what policies the panelists do recommend to governments and non-governmental parties, bearing in mind the principles and aims of the 2005 convention. And perhaps as well the header of our panel, Protect Me from What I Want. So let me start the debate reminding you only 2 older statements. The first one, it's a quote. The progress of science and technology has changed man's place in the world and the nature of his social relations. Ladies and gentlemen, this quote comes along 33 years ago. The Declaration of Cultural Policies of Mexico City from 1982 goes on. The technological progress of the last few years has led to the expansion of cultural industries. But whatever their mode of organization, these industries play an important role in the distribution of cultural goods and services. However, in their international activities, they often disregard the traditional values of society and kindle hope of aspirations which are not keeping with the actual needs of its development. Furthermore, the absence of national cultural industries may, particularly in developing countries, constitute a source of cultural dependence and give rise to alienation. End of quote. And my second remark, as our thinking always is framed, we should remember what Saskia Sassen wrote in 2002. She's a very famous, and you might know her, sociologist. I quote, "The technical attributes of the new information and communication technologies increasingly dominate explanations of contemporary change and development. Many sociologists see technology as the impetus of the most fundamental social trends and transformations. To this, I would add a tendency to understand or conceptualize these technologies in terms of technical proprieties and to construct the relation to the sociological or real world as one of the mere application and impacts." So, this is a very hard framing, perhaps, but I think it's just in the idea of the convention. The challenge for sociology is not so much, Sassen continues, to deny the weight of technology, but rather to develop analytic categories that allow us to capture the complex imbrication of technology and society. So let's start debating. And I want to begin with the first round, what the panelists do in this situation, what we call, meanwhile, digital era. And I would like to start with Emmanuel Durand. Can you explain what you do and how you use these stunning technologies?
Actually, my mother doesn't understand what I do as well, so... I would say our job is to create an organized desire and urge to see our content. And we are faced today with a paradox. The fact that we used to be in a mass media world where it was quite easy to touch an audience that was one audience, quite standardized and uniform. And we are now facing a multiplication of screens and a multiplication of communities and an individualization of the consumption of our content. And the paradox is that faced to this fragmentation, we could expect the diversity of content to be much, much greater than what it was. But it seems that it's the opposite that's happening, and perhaps it's due to two elements that we can put together. The first one being the kind of social proof and stickiness of how people behave online, and the second one being the Metcalfe flow, which means that the value of a network is equal to the square number of its participants. So that is creating a very strong polarization of how people consume our content. And there is a very strong, on our end, a very strong urge to develop a way to recommend content to maintain the value of our catalog, for instance. If I give you an example, a very trivial and concrete example, we do 60% of our turnover on physical sales of video with back catalog. And you could think that the internet has the ability to expose this famous long tail much more than the physical linear meters of shelves in stores. In digital sales, back catalog accounts for only 10% of our sales, which means that you have a flotation line, which is basically your screen, which can only propose maybe 10 different titles, and we know that there is no hope under that line. So there's a very big challenge for us right now to maintain this diversity, not for the sake of ethical, political grounds, as you stated in your introduction, but just for our survival, because we know that diversity is key to maintain the attractivity of attractiveness of these propositions. And so when we are talking about diversity, I know that in political meetings, etc., most people focus on the diversity of producing the content. How can we have different authors and producers producing various contents? And we know that this is going to become secondary to the diversity of consumption. Because even when you impose an SVOD platform with quotas, for instance, in order to have not just American content, but also European and French content, for instance, like we have that law for SVOD platform in France, this won't have an impact on the way people consume the content. And we know, David, you quoted Spotify before, we know that out of the 2 million songs that are present on the platform, maybe 90% of the consumption of the streams are concentrated on 10 or 100 artists. So there is a very strong challenge, and I think this is where the challenge lies for the years to come, for us as well, not just for the consumer.
Allow me a question. As you are talking about changes in the distribution channel, more or less. But your new task in the company is to develop new models of business, is it? With big data, yeah?
Yes, because I am afraid that the answer to this challenge comes with the clash of civilization. And you have the incumbents, the tenants of the old world, who think that a good recommendation should only come in the form of a human being, and the new world represented by Netflix and the others who push an algorithm and state that this algorithm is the key and the answer to everything. And I think that if we manage to maybe find a middle term in between those two visions, there is something to be done where we can have a role and we can have a voice. So this is part of the job that I'm doing at the moment.
We should try to make it more concrete. Is that possible?
Well,
without...
the problem with the internet giants is that they don't share much data. We're talking about data. We're talking about the information that you gather from your end consumer. So when you have a platform on which you can track what your clients are doing, you can then adapt your offering of service or product to those people. And if sorry? Personalized, yeah, individualized. But also, as Netflix stated, you can bend the way you create content, because they were very vocal on the use of data and algorithms on the writing of House of Cards, for instance. I doubt that this is a valid and viable solution for now for creation, but this is maybe a topic for later. And the issue with those actors is that they don't share much. So my goal is to try to recreate some kind of an open Netflix, not open in the same sense as open source or open data, but to try to find partners with which I can mutualize the information we have in order to be able to create an alternative to those recommendation engines. Is it more concrete?
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. My neighbor to the right, he, as I mentioned, is one of the founder and the technical brain, more or less, behind a kind of a new business model. And I want you to explain us what you do.
Sure. The technical brain is actually still in Berlin working. I get the luxury to talk to this lovely crowd. I think I'll come across a little bit more on the side of the machines, and I hope that's okay with everyone. So what we've built with IAM is a community of over 15 million photographers all over the world, 150 countries, that take hundreds of thousands of photos every day, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of photos on our platform. And it's a place where they interact, where they learn, where they get discovered, get featured. We produce magazines. We have actually the biggest photography exhibition and festival in the world with something like 250,000 photos submitted to this year's edition. And at some point we realized that this wide segment of photographers wanted more than from the social world or the social network than just likes and comments. And what we did was we built a marketplace around our product. The marketplace helps any photographer, any amateur, make money with their photos in terms that are much better than they would typically get. And it allows someone who was not a professional photographer a pathway to become a professional. I guess a lot of people here have heard of stock photography, Getty Images, Shutterstock, and so on. And these are companies that do something along those lines with very limited collections of 60 million photos, 100 million photos. When we set on to build this, we were talking about hundreds of millions, billions of photos. We're at a point where just in the last year, 1 trillion photos were created. That's more than the entire history of mankind before that. Next year, it's exponential. Next year, we'll create, again, more photos than entire mankind had created before us. So we realized that we had a bunch of problems to solve. We were at a point where there's enough content being created. There's enough signal, but there's also a lot of noise. So my challenge and the challenge of my team was, how do we find that signal? How do we find the relevant content in that, what we call the digital nirvana of endless feeds on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, of hundreds of millions of photos being uploaded, and algorithms deciding what you see, and the only alternative has been so far chronological. So you scroll down until you can't scroll anymore, and then you give up. And you get that moment which Dana Boyd famously calls the Twitter Zen, where you see these 3 dots and you just forget and assume that everything before that was irrelevant, even though it was just 30 minutes ago. So what we set out to do was we wanted to teach machines to see. To teach machines to see, we had to teach them 2 things. To see what we as humans see, and to feel what we as humans feel. So one would ask, can a machine see? And the answer is resoundingly yes. We've built algorithms that can recognize 20,000 different concepts in a photo, everything from bottle, table, tree, to landscape, nature, to compositional elements. We recognize symmetry, we recognize negative space for those that are into photography. But we also recognize fear. We recognize anger, we recognize peace, we recognize majestic landscapes. We understand the essence of a photo. And the only way we can do that is through data. So we have millions and millions of photos that we use to train these algorithms. And we go through every single one of them automatically, of course, not manually. And we train our machines to understand what makes a photo represent something like Halloween, and what makes a photo represent something like a foot. The bigger question was, can we understand and differentiate good photos from bad photos? And the answer is also yes. And this gets a little presumptuous, because in a lot of cases people say, well, there's the creativity and there's the subjectivity of beauty and of what I find appealing. And unfortunately, that's sort of our state as human beings, that we tend to think that we're special. But effectively, we are a bunch of neurons that fire at different signals and interact. And that's sort of what this whole world of machine learning and of deep learning is trying to model at a much, much smaller scale. So we can look at a photo and we can tell you if a photo is beautiful or not. We can actually look at a photo and say if a 16-year-old girl from Houston, Texas will find that photo beautiful, and if a 45-year-old man from Tokyo will find that photo beautiful. We can actually tell the difference between the content that a company like a consulting company like the Boston Consulting Group would like versus the content that the Mercedes-Benz is interested in. And this is the only way, by automating that whole process, that we can actually index every single photo in the world. And that's our mission. We're looking to index 1 trillion photos, make them searchable, make them trackable, understand the history of that photo, where it came from, where it's going, understand, will this photo go viral? Will this photo be trending on Instagram? And at some point you get to a point where you start asking, and this is where it gets a little scary as well, if we're so good at detecting trends and at understanding concepts like virality and what people like and what people appreciate, how far along are we from actually influencing that? And to me, this is sort of the bigger interesting question as we move forward. Understanding trends is one thing, but when do we get to the point where we're letting machines actually create these trends? And that's pretty much what we do every day.
Another question as well. Do you find differences between the taste of the Japanese girl and the girl in, let us say, in Paris?
Yeah, I mean, there are differences on pretty much every single element of the demographic, from age to gender to educational level to. So yes, of course there are different interests, but there are always overarching values, particularly when it comes to something like beauty in a photo, not beauty as a person, but aesthetic appeal of a photo, where there are certain standards, and this actually comes from a field called visual saliency, which it's sort of in neuroscience, and the idea there is within the first milliseconds of observing something, and that's, I think, somehow where the whole idea of love at first sight came from. Within the first milliseconds of observing something, you actually have already judged it, and you've decided whether you find it appealing or not. The next steps are you start trying to understand why you find it appealing. Is it the composition? Is it the lines? Is it the subject matter? But within those 20 milliseconds is what we are trying to emulate. And what we're looking at there are almost invisible features of media, of photos, and in the future maybe of videos and of virtual reality scapes.
And we will come back to your question, how far are you away from influencing then as well, because it's a communicating system, more or less. So, as I said in my introduction, you are a wonderful example for crossing the river from analog world, where you worked, I think, 16 years.
Yeah, 16 years.
In Sotheby's. Now to the digital market for arts. Tell us what you do.
So, as you were saying, I am the co-founder of a digital art app called Tondo. What we aimed to do at the launch of this product was to democratize the art space and to make it basically more accessible. Where I come from the fine art world, which is possibly one of the most archaic and analog industries remaining. It is steeped in hierarchy, steeped in conservatism, steeped in old-fashioned ways. And it's also extremely resistant to change. So while at Sotheby's, which, an incredible firm, but, it's 270 years old, it has a lot of history, I started to pick up, as well as my co-founder, who's also from Sotheby's, on the impact that digital and social was having on the fine art space, and that people's need to discover in a different way was becoming clearer and clearer. So we left and we decided we'll set up effectively a social network which will flatten the structure, which will allow an expert-led conversation to happen, which is open to everyone and anyone. So there's no hierarchy, there's no need to have a physical contact in the physical world to bring you in. And that was the premise on which we built the product. Our learnings over the last year have been actually pretty incredible. So what we've seen sort of in a broader sense is the art world, the fine art world, is moving online, albeit slowly. Their preferred path is social. So that's really where they inhabit versus having sort of very robust digital offerings in their own businesses. They tend to use mostly Twitter and, for the large part, Instagram, which has become really the main leader for the fine art space, where artists, collectors, galleries, auction houses get to post images on there, and they get to see, what's liked, what's not liked, who follows them. And it's giving them, I think, for the first time, a sense of what people want to discover, what people want to see, what their feelings about the art are. We've also, learned this from our own site, and we've been watching it very carefully and gathering data from about 450,000 users. and watching how do they, what do they like, what do they consume, how do they respond. And you have to remember, the fine art world is impenetrable. It is meant to be that way. It is built as a fortress to keep everybody on the outside. So, there is no desire to make it easy. So what we've discovered is that there are two things that really stand out. People want to get hold of expertise. That's really the main thing. And they want to discover artists that matter. And that's, it goes back to what the gentleman was just saying about, what matters and what doesn't matter, what's good, what isn't good from, a trillion photographs, what represents a good photograph. So what we've been doing in the last few months is migrating our product to answer those questions. So we are migrating to an algorithm-led product, which will, with a layer of expertise, sort of be that hybrid of algorithm and personal, simply give people the hottest artists to buy in a single download of an app. So it takes away the need to be included at the right receptions, the need to find the right person to take you through the door. It also takes away the bias, because the art market is inherently biased. So there is an agenda behind much of what is offered for sale, what is sold, the prices that are achieved. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors that happen in this space. So we have, through the algorithm, which we've had some incredible mathematicians work with us on, takes a lot of that bias away. So we're hoping that will deliver something very robust and simple to our audience.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. You represent more or less one of these giants, and try to find as well new business models and to create in a way new wealth chains, and I wonder how you do that.
So actually, I mean, we're definitely living through a very interesting moment in our history. I mean, we would love to see ourselves as a 40-year-old startup, which is obviously impossible because, I mean, we're 40-year-old, so I mean, it's definitely not a startup. But still, when you're looking the way we are trying to operate, it's a lot about that. I think our core mission has been, it will probably always be, empowering people to do stuff and do incredible stuff. I mean, our mission is really just to build platforms that artists, researchers, writers, or musicians will be able to build on top of and really invent new things. If you think about it, probably the top 100 bestsellers from the New York Times have been written on Word, which is one of our historical canonical product. And we never thought about this until very recently, when we really launched ourselves into the world of data, and we have been active in this field for the last 10 years. And pretty much to what you were saying about photos. I mean, we're pretty much active in everything machine learning. So we are building machines that can learn and that can help others, avoiding the cost of building those machines and those algorithms. So basically, when you're looking at the things we're doing, we are obviously doing products that you probably know. I mean, when Windows is something you know, Skype is something you know, Xbox is something you know. But we're also building things, data platforms, analytics platforms that enable startups, that enable creators actually to use their own Lego bricks and build their own creations on top of our systems and on top of our data. So this is this kind of new world we're living in, which is enabling others really to access every data possible in the world. That can be a Twitter feed, Facebook post, Instagram photo, but can be also business data or all those kind of open data that really exist in the world, and trying to mix that and trying to find the weak signals and the things that are not visible if you're not really unleashing the power of algorithms. One of the very interesting things that we have been doing for years now is a very silly thing, which is trying to predict the winning awards for the Oscars every year. And we'll probably stop doing that because it became too easy, which can be super shocking in many ways, because when you 4 years in a row you predict 100% of every Oscar award every year, you tend to think, whoa, I mean, it shouldn't be data-driven. I mean, because obviously it's acting performance, it's something which is very, very much emotional, very much personal, and obviously there's a lot of politics going on. I mean, between Hollywood studios to really making sure that their film and their movies is much more successful than the other one. So you would say this is pretty much human-centric. But actually, for the last 4 years, 100% of every Emmy awards and Oscars have been predicted right by our algorithms. So you came to think that actually, what you were saying about when do machines start not thinking by themselves, because you always have to think about the fact that machines are being programmed by humans, and so far this is still the case. That may evolve in the near future, but so far it is still the case. So there's definitely this moment where you think about what can you achieve, what can you do, and what is your responsibility of driving those new behaviors, and to which extent there is a fine balance between enabling and influencing. And I think this is really the kind of the core discussion that we're having internally with our engineers, saying at some point we just need to really think harder and really bring much more perspective from philosophers and much more ethos into the way we are really building algorithms. And this is also the key reason why we have been super active and super kind of candid and transparent about how we're using data, to really make sure that this can't be a private property from any corporation in the world. So we really need to elevate the debate, and we decided to pave the way and lead this way. It's not perfect, obviously, and we still need to need some. We definitely got some good guidance from German governments, actually. So thank you for that. But really, it's really about making sure that we have this open dialogue, and that no corporation in any perspective, in any circumstances, can really cross the line between enabling and influencing without people knowing.
But what you describe to create new platforms for meshing and remixing and recontextualizing is just the opposite. What was the philosophy beforehand? Is that true?
Yeah, it's. I think the technology world has this curious behavior when you don't know what you don't know until you invent it. So basically, I think nobody was really thinking that holographic reality and holograms were possible before we actually showed the world that it was possible, and even us were not really convinced it was possible. So the problem with technology is that it's a moving target and a moving frontier. So every time a new concept like big data or in social network or machine learning, which is probably one of the hottest things right now, is appearing, that means that tech companies are always inventing something more, looking forward. So the difficulty, I think, for cultural industries and the world of culture is really being curious enough, actually, to really having this open dialogue with technology companies. I think the worst thing that could happen is that actually there is no dialogue, and that the future of culture is only invented by tech companies. I think the dialogue is really key. It's very much interesting to see that, obviously in France, with forums like the Forum d'Avignon, from my good friend Laure, it's happening. Mm-hmm. It's not happening everywhere. And I think we have definitely this accountability, probably in France, in Europe, really to lead this discussion. And you were asking about Europa Nova. Europa Nova it's a European think tank, and it's built on the very simple thinking that either you're a player or a victim of Europe. So we decided to be players. And we really just decided to say, hey, rather than complaining about Europe being far away and being kind of an absurd constraint from a bureaucratic perspective that most people would think. Let's try to embody that. Let's try to bring more passion, more emotion, and more action. Mm-hmm. And this is exactly the kind of topics where we're trying to influence and we're trying to do things the right way.
Thank you, Nicolas. I want you to ask him perhaps about these futures and developments, but let me just mention that we have had such a debate in Germany as well, wonderful remixed films using some material from very different prominent sources, violated so many laws in Germany that it was not possible to show them. So what is your answer to this situation when we go in this direction you want to go? What should be changed in Europe, for example, in Europe?
It's, I mean, obviously, it's a pretty tough question. I think, I mean, openness, I think, is something which is easy to say, complex to operate. It happens that the technology world is currently dominated by American companies. I mean, we may regret that as Europeans, but this is just a bare fact. So if you happen to live in the US, just like I did, you definitely understand that the relationship between the citizens and culture is much more practical in many ways and much more detached in many ways. That means that it's much more a consumption product, and I think the depths of the cultural heritage and dimension diversity is something which is much more an elite thinking rather than a popular thinking. So the real question we are obviously facing is, in a world of data, how do we think about the governance of data and machines is probably one of the most important thing about the future of culture. And obviously, I mean, all the debates recently about the safe harboring of data, Patriot Act, I mean, the Austrian court going against Facebook to say, hey, guys, you can't do whatever you want with these European citizen data back in the US. I mean, it really elevates a debate about what really matters. And it's just not an economic conflict between the US and Europe. It's really an ethical discussion about what data means. And I think most of the debate recently really forgot about data is about humans. And actually, behind every data, there is a kind of human action. And data need to fly with humans. Need to fly with data. Data needs to fly with human. And that, I think this is our general council, which happens to be a very francophile general council for most of the US companies, just has been super transparent about the fact that we need to reinvent the model for governance of data between the US and Europe. It is a long fight. I think. I mean, there's a lot of discussion between the EU right now and the US government about the transatlantic treaty. But this is really, I think, what we can do on a very practical basis.
You're all familiar with the safe harbor decision in Germany, so I want you to react. Perhaps you first.
Safe harbor.
Yeah, and to know what he mentioned, for example.
So, I mean, I think we're on the same page. I do think there needs to be a change. I think the way things are going right now definitely hurts. Maybe it's not on the cultural side, but definitely hurts entrepreneurship and innovation in Europe, as is the case, where we had to take time to reevaluate every single service we use because of safe harbor and because of data transportation laws and so on, and at the point where I do believe, and that's why I guess the US has that inherent advantage when it comes to anything technological innovation. It's part of the culture as well. It's the shorter history, the Wild West, strike gold, do it yourself mentality, versus sort of the conservatism that we have here, both on the funding side as well as on the cultural side. I'm personally not that worried about privacy. I see it a little more pragmatically, and we were speaking about that earlier, that the notion of privacy, of the right to be let alone, is a relatively new one in the history of mankind, and it didn't account for the world that we'd be living in today, right? So on the one hand, I do think we need to change the definition of privacy before we move forward. I did a lot of research on that in my graduate days. And there are several models, and I think our notion of privacy, of just being able to disconnect and go live in the woods like Thoreau, is not the one that is conduit to participating in today's highly digital, highly data-driven world. So I think the bigger question is about control, and it's about transparency and knowledge. And I do think that on a lot of levels, the EU is trying to exactly fight for that, to actually fight for understanding what Google stores on their servers. The reality is, though, and we're talking about big data, reality is it's not data that you can just download and read through an Excel sheet. It's millions and millions and millions of random lines of information, the majority of which are totally irrelevant. Mm-hmm. So I think we can relax a little bit about it, because the volume of data also makes it quite difficult to target individuals on that level. That's at least how I see it. And yeah, sure.
It's really interesting for me. I'm born in the UK, but I live in New York, and my company is based in the US, and the conversation is entirely different here as it is in the US. Mm-hmm. So we're a US company, we're regulated by the US laws, and to what you were saying, the new regulation around data and the transfer of data, what we do with it, how we store it, is really crippling entrepreneurship. So the US is sort of reacting to, let's say, to my company, which is a sort of small to mid-sized company. I now face tens of thousands of dollars of fees, plus I have to have servers in Ireland, servers in all over Europe to try and bounce this data around. And in our, quest, I think, to try and protect something, which I agree with you, is we can't download this on our phone. We can't just get this data in a second. That it almost seems like this David and Goliath type of battle, that Europe is the David here. And from the American perspective, and I happen to agree with it, it's very much of the horse bolted. Okay? It's out the door. We have all the data is being shared everywhere. Of course there should be rules. Of course there have to be regulations around this, but it's going to come at a cost that's going to crush entrepreneurship and creativity. And to me, that's a very, very bad thing.
Mm-hmm. What do you hear, Emmanuel?
Yeah, my view on this is that we tend to have a legal and regulatory response to innovation, and it proves that it's not working at the moment. Also, perhaps because those companies operate on a global scale, and regulations are limited geographically. So I agree with you, I think what we are doing right now is preventing European champions to emerge and become the ones who can maybe protect us more from a monopoly of the data usage by big internet giant from the US. And there is I think it's not meant to be that today the big companies have to come from the US. It used to be the case because of this huge domestic market that they had, where they could, amortize their investment before going abroad. But you can see that Spotify is from Sweden, Waze comes from Israel. They're not huge countries, I think. And today, the entry barriers to becoming an internet giant are none, or much smaller than what they used to be. So I think the cultural and legal environment is becoming critical, and that's where maybe we are lagging behind a bit.
And as you say, is it Europe?
I think France is even more restrictive than Europe on the case, because of this exception culturelle. I know I spoke the words, I don't.
There is no exception culturelle, as we call it, because cultural products always have a double nature, as we say it, as in this convention of 2005. So we should have a governance, but this will be our third round, a governance model in Europe, I would say, not in nation states alone, in Europe, to really frame the development in a cultural way. But nevertheless, to be open for development. And this is more or less what we really look for. Very interesting what you said, Nicolas. You said there is a kind of a philosophical debate needed. What is data? And let us finish the first round. What is data, actually? Would you try to define it?
Another tough question. I think the philosophical debate, I mean, and actually I think when one German philosopher has been pretty much leading this discussion in Ans Jonas with that Prinzip Verantwortung, the principle of responsibility that basically led to the way we're saying regulation in Europe, which is much more being more cautious led rather than innovation led. I think moving from das Prinzip Verantwortung to das Prinzip Innovation and really being able to say, hey, innovation could be nurtured first and then seeing whether there is some abuse, and if there's some abuse, then regulate, which is much more practical of saying that. I think that the real question about data is not that much defining data, because data, in my word, it's pretty simple. It's 0 and 1s. So it's bits. And everything can be coded in 0 and 1s, and then you have data. And basically, an entire word is running on data right now. And every time you're withdrawing some cash from an ATM, this is just raw data being operated, and there's been some years and years and years of machine learning and data being operated without even you noticing. So I think it's not that much defining data, rather than defining what is data that can be related to personal, I would say, insights. And it's much more about being able to define what is an anonymous or anonymized data, rather than defining data, which is, a very interesting concept, philosophically speaking, but I think is not of great operational help when it comes to really seeing what is the fine balance you need to strike between innovation and responsibility. And I think just focusing on what is the right level of anonymization that enables services like IAM, where actually you don't need personal data, you just need some clustering and statistical clustering at some point, really to get the first insights. And then if the user wants more, then he can definitely opt in for more and accept his personal data to be used. I think this is really the core discussion we're personally having with a lot of regulatory bodies on the planet about how we're using data the right way. It's not much more about defining it, but what is the fine threshold between personal and anonymized, and where it's okay to use that for the greater benefit of hopefully the society.
Would you have an answer?
Mine is similar to Nicolas. I think it's about the levels of sensitivity versus what is not sensitive data. So I think we all individually will have our own views on that. This is where it becomes very complicated. That what is sensitive to me may not be sensitive to you. And, as Nicolas was talking, again, this is just the way my brain works. It's important to have these conversations. It's critical that we have legislation, but it's almost like, the flood happened. Okay, so this has happened. Google has been around for decades. We've been online for decades. We've had mobile phones for decades. It's done. Our data is out there. We have a digital footprint that is around the world all the time. And yes, there absolutely have to be parameters and guidelines of usage around that. But my view on that, again, is what is data? Should the right circumstances arise, any government in any country in the world will find a reason to access that data. So to me, it's about, maybe it's a personal choice. Maybe we have to have more personal choice as we're opting into services to say, what we want recorded, what we don't want recorded.
It's actually I agree with both gentlemen. I do think it's not a matter of understanding data, it's a matter of defining what privacy means, and it's a redefinition of privacy. And it goes back again to the fact that it's a dated concept. And I think privacy is the cost of participation, privacy as we know it historically. And it becomes more a matter of control, and it becomes more a matter of knowing who has access to my data and what they can do with it. And it's that really simplifies the problem. And it is a philosophical question. It's the definition of the private and the public sphere. It's Heidegger, it's Habermas, it's the conversation that's been going on for decades. I think on the other hand, if we forget about the data side of things, also comparing what people are doing across the Atlantic, there are massive think tanks that are being launched to focus on artificial intelligence, to focus on the next steps. So right here, we're still stuck with oh my God, Google has cookies that know that I Googled for this or that last week. And over there, they're already thinking about, how do I control the machine revolution? How do I make sure that no one organization owns that artificial general intelligence, the AGI, which basically superhuman level intelligence that can accelerate into the singularity or the point where we don't know what's coming after. So there's just recently OpenAI was announced by Elon Musk from Tesla and so on, together with people from Y Combinator and researchers from Stanford, and they have $1 billion invested into simply democratizing artificial intelligence and making sure that that there is some sort of oversight on the kind of machines that are being developed and what the end results of that are. I think that's why they are ahead. I think it's the matter of attitude as well. About they're thinking 20 years from now, and we're thinking 20 years ago, and that worries me personally.
We have a saying in Germany, who is master and who is the dog, and you are familiar with this. It's a children's sing-song. And do you see differences in different cultures to answer this question of privacy and development, big data? Do you see them?
I'm not sure you will see many differences when it comes to our field, entertainment, because when you talk about sensitivity to privacy, I think it's much more the matter of which type of data are you talking about. If you are talking about, do I like Game of Thrones? Normally people are quite vocal about it. So it's not a very sensitive information. When it comes to your health or your financial balance, this is maybe more a privacy issue. And maybe the problem is that you have to create laws that cover data in a whole, where, in fact, the concept covers lots of different information that don't have the same level of sensitivity. I think that we are blessed in entertainment of having behaviors that are meaningful for people, that are social markers, that people use those behaviors to define themselves and recreate or create communities of like-minded people, you know. And this is what we are trying to do. We try all the time to create this social bond between people, and that's why cinemas still exist, when it could be easier perhaps to all watch on VOD, and people still go out and want to be close to other people. So I think in that sense, the use of data can only bring a more relevant experience when used properly to the people, and I don't see that as a threat. I see that as something extremely promising. But it's a new frontier, in a sense that it's a Far West. Yeah. And you have gangsters, and you have sheriffs, and you have, lots of things are happening, so you can't judge the frontier. You can just try to navigate around this.
Not around.
Sorry?
Not around, perhaps, but navigate with it, perhaps. Yeah?
It's there.
Yeah. Thank you very much for this closing round for the first round. I want to put just a short second round. What will us bring the future? Can you tell us what kind of new business models, new technological developments you see at the horizon? And then we close the third round directly with the question, what should we do to regulate or to cultural frame it in a way?
The way I see how people are behaving right now is that it's polarized. It's polarized between meaningful experiences and convenience, which means that for cinema, for instance, you will have theaters on one end and Netflix on the other hand. For music, you will have concerts here and Spotify here. So it's either or. So what we can do to keep culture as lively as possible is to try to bring as many people to the meaningful side, because that's where the effective bond between the public and the content is the stronger.
Yeah. Would all agree? Content is the strongest? Okay, sure.
I think content is the strongest, but also I'm looking at my world, which is art. You know, the reasons there are still museums is people want to go physically and see a picture. So we'll get virtual reality, you know, that's coming, get better and better, so you'll be able to see the Mona Lisa in your kitchen. Okay, as if you're standing in front of it in, the next 5 years. But I think it's not just content. For me, it's also the social. That social experience, that interaction, like you were saying about going to the movies, that is key. I think we are social animals, however much we're on Facebook, however much we're on Twitter. We like to be around other people.
And I think it's quite comforting to see that today technology hasn't solved solitude. And we still have to experience friction. We are not in a seamless world where, you know, it's all about fluidity and convenience like you are when you are online. You want to go out and experience the people around you eating popcorn and, you know, and
talking.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you see as the future coming?
It's a very big question.
Big wave.
That's a very big question.
Yeah.
I do think that our perception of technology will change.
Mm-hmm.
There's this anecdote that one of the people who work on the self-driving car at Google keeps using whenever we chat. And he says when the elevator was invented, for the first 20 years, you had a person pushing the button because people didn't trust that a machine could just take you up 5 floors and put you down 5 floors. And I think it's along the same lines. I think the data is out there, the technology is out there, the machines are out there, the know-how, the skills are out there. I think it's just a matter of, in the next years, we will start to accept the reality that a lot of our experiences can be predicted. A lot of our decisions can be predicted, and actually see that as an advantage. See that as a point where I don't have to wake up and think about what to wear. I have my AI that just tells me, you know, this is your T-shirt, this is your jeans. You were going to wear that anyway. Trust me. Why not? You know. And I think it applies the same on so many different levels. We're developing technologies that help you, that tell you how to take a photo while you're taking it. That says, move a little to the left, wait 5 more minutes until the sun gets in that position, and change the exposure a little bit, and then you have a photo that resembles something like Cartier-Bresson would have made. That doesn't mean that photography is no longer there. It just means that it's augmented, like pretty much every single experience that we have today.
Augmented reality. This is the next point. Is that richness, a new richness, or is it a kind of a danger for the autonomous person?
I think it is definitely not a danger. I think it's on the horizon already. I think the combination of AI and artificial and augmented reality will be phenomenal. The impact on the world will be really incredible. Most of us live in major cities, so we have access to great things all the time. So we can go to the theater, the opera, the museums. It's very easy for us. If you're more remote, if you're in different parts of the world, it's not as simple to access this, to access culture, to access great libraries, to access great museums, great operas. So that augmented reality, that virtual reality piece, I think, personally, that's going to be life-changing for the planet. That you'll be able to be in a small village somewhere in the sub-Sahara, and you'll be able to experience the Bolshoi Ballet as if it was happening in front of you. And I think that's where culture will become entirely, widespread, and what really, for me, what culture is there for. It is there for our enrichment as humans. And if there's a technological way to spread that faster and further, then I'm absolutely all for that.
Okay. We start the third round, and I want you to recommend the stakeholders of this international treaty. We are celebrating more or less 10th birthday. What do you recommend to Let us say the governments who signed this treaty, in order to safeguard more or less diversity, what would you say 10 years later? What should they do? What should they change, perhaps? As Ramzi said, it is a kind of a perception of the reality where we live in and where we will live in. And so you regulate what in this direction?
I think your question really depends on how you foresee the word that's coming. In 2005, Facebook was not existing. Smartphones were even a mere concept. Video gaming was like it was nice, but it was not what it's right now. And obviously no artificial intelligence, machine learning, data capacity was even thinkable because there was not enough computational capacity on the planet just to really think about what you could do with that. So if you envision the word that is coming, that will be fully hybrid. I think to me the key word is really about hybrid, meaning hybrid reality. And just showcasing and accepting that we are moving from our own Middle Age to kind of new Renaissance. And if you're thinking that way, and especially for the word of culture, you're moving from people that were culture professionals, and highly trained musicians, creators, writers, artists, doing one thing, and in a kind of elitist model, to a world where actually the new power comes much more from amateurship and people having some amateur practices and combining amateur with professional and picking some content existing on the web and build on that, recombining that into something new. I think the best example for me of that is SoundCloud. SoundCloud is a fantastic European startup, and just these guys enable anyone with a little bit of talent to take some music tracks and actually remix them and create new stuff out of existing content. So do you call that art? I mean, just the mere concept of art and culture will be fantastically transformed by those technologies and those opportunities in the next years. So how do you regulate that? I think the only thing you can say is first adopt a kind of balanced optimism perspective rather than trying to defend something that may have vanished in many ways. And vanishing is not a bad word, just like that. We are already pretty much entrenched into a hybrid world where our real life and digital life are so much intertwined that actually we can't differentiate the one from the other. So regulation needs to evolve to reflect that. So that probably means that with this kind of balanced optimism principle, making sure that we regulate ex post rather than ex ante. And I think everything that we have been doing, especially in Europe, is really trying to find the perfect regulatory framework first and then see whether it works. I think the only real big difference with the general principle of common law from an Anglo-Saxon perspective is just say, hey, let's see how reality works. And then from that, let's try to balance and adapt and regulate what needs to be regulated. So it's much more ex ante than ex post than ex ante. And I think that the principles in the 2005 conventions, I think, are the right ones. The question is that how do you make sure that the regulation is not smothering innovation, is not smothering possibilities and opportunities, and actually is much more a framework for freedom, rather a framework for defending maybe something that is not that much existing in reality.
Mm-hmm. When you please include in your answer the question, should there be in this really strong development, which you all describe, should there be some kind of cultural identity regulation as well? Should there be some value be incorporated in the idea about the future society? It has been said, a wonderful saying from Kissinger, I think he said it, diplomacy is about perception, and the perception of the world is quite different between you and politicians today, I would say. And my idea or my perception myself in Germany, for example, we just had an IT summit, and the Minister for Economy said, big data is just the opposite of our protection idea. And so they start to perceive what is going on in a way, but do they have any answer, and what should they answer in your mind?
Well, I think it reflects what you were saying, which is it's going to be a post answer. So again, sites like the photography site, Instagram, Twitter, the use of images is a very good example. So there's lots and lots of regulations and artist resale rights, and every European country has a different rule, and the US has a different rule for the reuse of images. We, the consumers, the users, will dictate exactly what and how we use things. And the regulation will have to come after. And I think it's just a general mind shift for us as a population and our governments and our regulators to start to think about it in a different way, rather than regulating up front and then dealing with all the breaches in the regulation, which is really how, for example, artist resale rights work. And then they introduced, we're in Paris, the droit de suite rule, the payment for artists. Again, it was a sort of a bandage shoved onto a problem way after it had already happened. And I think as technology evolves, as we consumers dictate exactly what we want and how we want it, our governments will have no choice but to respond post.
I have my doubts, because when I see what happened just recently in Berlin, there was a Google launching of an artist performance with the Philharmonie in Berlin, as well with the opera in Paris, as well with the Shakespeare Company in Great Britain. 5 big players in the artistic analog world. And now they are cooperating in the world together of the digital future. This is wonderful, why they open up really for the world, these channels. But the question remains, what is with the smaller companies doing artistic expressions? Where do they stay in this future?
I'm actually very optimistic. Yeah. I think we live we're at the dawn of something really great when it comes to openness, and I think we're at a point where culture is going to be available to everyone. You can't hold it back, and so it's not a fear that technology or the internet or even big data, and the fact that people in charge call it big data is something scary in itself, because that term is a misnomer. It's some fabrication. I think on the level of the people who are in charge, there needs to be more education. There needs to be more understanding of what it is that they're trying to regulate and how it works. And on the other hand, I think they should let people free, because what we've been saying the whole time is it's out there. There was a panelist earlier who said some artist in his living room created an album and won 7 Grammys a year later. Maybe, I don't know if you guys predicted that as well. But I think that's fascinating. And that is culture, and that is openness. And we live in a world that will empower people to have access to the data that they need, to have access to the culture and the experiences that they want. And we shouldn't be trying to pull that back. We should actually be embracing it as long as we understand the implications. Mm-hmm.
This is the idea of the convention, more or less. And if I question once more, Emmanuel, what would you recommend government parties today?
I agree that it's scary that we are in a situation in the digital world where it's the winner-takes-all situation, and then you have big giants coming in. And I think people maybe undermine the resilience of the network. And the fact that dominance today lasts much less longer than it used to do. And I remember David quoting, new startups like Forgetify trying to work on the flaws of Spotify to offer new ways of engaging with your music, etc. I think there is a critical element to what you find satisfying in a cultural experience, which is surprise. You want to be surprised. You want to say, I've never seen anything like this before. And this goes against data, this goes against algorithms, this goes against a unified, monopolistic view of the world. This speaks in itself for diversity. So we should be, maybe you will call me naive, or a bit candid, perhaps. But I really think that the best answer to those monopolies that can be quite scary, I get it, are pushing the fires for new innovations to help new startups emerge that will maybe invent something we don't even know about today. So that's, and I understand that the regulatory time, the rhythm is much slower than the pace of those innovations. So it is a very hard challenge to cope with those two very different rhythms. Maybe one key is about, okay, let's say data is the new oil, so maybe there's something to be done around taxes. And because we haven't been talking about tax evasions and everything, but it's a key element, I think. And there have been some, answers that have been trying to be given around this, being, for instance, companies should be taxed where the data is used or collected, for instance, rather than, and that could be that could give a fairer share of resources to everyone. So those are elements where you could work on, but I think that trying to dismantle big giants, it doesn't work the way it used to be with the antitrust laws, etc. Because the power of Google is that it's a platform. It doesn't have to be dominant in each and every field it operates, because its power comes from the synergies that it creates by operating in those different segments. So it's much harder for laws to regulate that kind of dominance.
Thank you very much, these wonderful panelists, and I want you to give them a big applause, because I think they opened up a panorama, a wonderful panorama. We couldn't really answer every question, but I think we understood the big change which is going on, and that we have to understand that our personal perception and our political perception is very important to find the right solutions to save and promote our culture. Thank you very much.
Merci.